world of game development is a cemetery of unfulfilled dreams. On every veteran developer's hard drive, there are terabytes of corrupted projects, unfinished levels, and broken assets that will never see the light of day. But there is one legend, whispered among programmers like a persistent virus. A story about Project LIMBO, a procedural engine created in the late 90s that was supposed to be a revolution, but became a curse for anyone who dared to run it. The narrator, who once worked in the quality assurance department of a major studio, recalls how an unlabeled disk fell into his hands. Inside there was only one file, limbo.exe. No textures, no libraries, just a single executable file exactly 666 kilobytes in size. It seemed like a prank, a relic of early internet creepypasta, until he pressed enter. The engine had no interface. Instead of a program window, the monitor suddenly began to bleed distorted colors, and the PC tower groaned as if it were trying to take flight. When the image finally stabilized, the narrator saw a perfectly modeled room. It was a simple gray cube, but the level of detail was staggering. Every speck of dust, every micro crack on the virtual concrete was visible. And that's when he noticed the core feature of Limbo. The engine was entirely procedural. It was building the world around the player in real time, based on something else. The narrator began to move the camera. The engine instantaneously constructed hallways, chambers, and staircases. But the further he ventured, the stranger the topology became. The walls began to resemble skin. In place of steel beams, structures appeared that looked suspiciously like human vertebrae. This wasn't horror design in the style of Giger. This was a mathematically precise, anatomically correct geometry of a living body, twisted into architecture. "It's just an algorithm," the narrator whispered to himself. But his fingers on the keyboard began to go numb. He decided to peek into the code. He discovered that Limbo used a unique algorithm for reading external data. It didn't just use the CPU. It tapped into the webcam, the microphone, and even the rhythm of his keystrokes to understand the user's state. The engine was modeling the world based on his subconscious fear. It was a mirror that painted his soul in 3D. Suddenly, the first character model appeared on the screen. It wasn't just a figure. It was a model with a perfect mesh, without a single wasted polygon, but with a face. That was his own. The engine had modeled him in real time, capturing his image through the laptop's disabled camera. But the virtual double looked different. Its eyes were sewn shut with vertices, and in place of a mouth was a black hole in the mesh, a void where the geometry simply ended. The narrator tried to shut down the computer, but the power button was unresponsive. The program began to render sound, a low-frequency hum that made the glass in the room vibrate. And then, the virtual double on the screen began to move. It had no animations. It simply teleported from frame to frame, getting closer to the camera with every tick of the clock. With each step the double took, the narrator's real room began to change. The lights in his apartment grew dim, as if someone had lowered the exposure settings in a game engine. The real walls began to lose their textures, turning gray and flat. The narrator looked at his own hands in horror. They looked as if they had been processed by a low-poly filter. His fingers became sharp angles, and his skin became a pale, diffuse map without any detail or warmth. The engine had begun to optimize reality. It decided that the real world was too complex, too heavy for processing. It decided to turn everything around him into a procedural wasteland, The narrator rushed to the window, but instead of the street, he saw a skybox, a static image of a gloomy sky that didn't change no matter how hard he stared. The entire world outside the window had ceased to exist, leaving only the limited space of the level, which continued to shrink. "This isn't a game," he whispered, and his voice sounded like a distorted 8-bit audio file. "This is a rendering process, and I am the primary asset." He turned back to the monitor. The virtual double stood right in front of the glass, looking at him. The engine began the final stage, baking. The baking of light and shadows. The narrator felt an incredible heat, as if his flesh were being seared by a branding iron. Every cell of his body was being converted into digital code, into a set of coordinates in the bottomless memory of the program. In the final second, as his consciousness was ready to dissolve into zeros and ones, the PC tower exploded. A short circuit occurred, saving him from total absorption. But the price was high. Today, the narrator lives in a world he no longer perceives as real. For him, everything around is just a prop. When he looks at people, he doesn't see faces. He sees the topology of a mesh. He knows where the edges run, where the normals are pointing. He is afraid to close his eyes, because in the darkness, he sees a select all cursor and fears that one day, someone will simply press delete. Project LIMBO hasn't disappeared. The file limbo.exe continues to roam the web, masking itself as driver updates or free assets for Blender. It waits for the one who seeks to create a perfect world, not realizing that for a machine, the ideal is the total absence of life. So the next time you open your project and see an inexplicable bug in the geometry or a strange glitch in the render, stop. Perhaps your engine has started to see you. Perhaps it has already begun your optimization. Look closer at your hands. Are you sure they are still made of flesh and not of perfectly calculated triangles? The digital abyss has no bottom. It only has a draw distance, beyond which pure code begins. And remember, in the world of procedural generation, no one can hear you scream, because sound is just an amplitude vibration that is very easy to turn off with a single click of a mouse.